You're tuned in to The Last Radio Show.
Hello and welcome to The Last Radio Show. I'm John Lynch.
I'm Jenn Reilly.
And this is a show where we talk about stuff, all kinds of stuff, news, history, pop culture, whatever we feel like. And this is going to come as a shock to you. Mm-hmm. But occasionally, presidents can be less than truthful about things.
Oh, really?
Yep.
On the occasional side.
On the occasion, they can bend the truth occasionally.
See, I always thought you couldn't get to be president without bending the truth.
Well, the first one never told a lie.
Right.
But
that's
that might have been a law, too. That might have been a lie, too. We don't know.
Exactly.
But, so they occasionally tend to fib, and they will fib about their health. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
Okay.
Now, it just came out just the other day. President Trump, there's been a lot of pictures lately that showed like bruises on his hands that were kind of covered up with makeup, and his ankles look kind of swollen. And basically the White House said he has, and I'm going to try and get this right, chronic venous insufficiency. Okay. And this is not a life-threatening thing. It's basically as you get a little older, it's pretty common in older people. And, you know, the president, I believe, is 79 now or 80, maybe even yet. It's basically your circulation to your extremities isn't what it used to be. Right. You bruise easily, things great. Yeah. So that seems to be what it is. And it's not, hopefully for his sake, not a big deal. But of course, there are people who think like, well, there's more to it probably, and they're covering things up kind of thing. Of course, with President Trump and President Biden before him, there have been a lot of talk about President's health lately because they're both older. Yeah, late 70s, early 80s when they took office, and when Joe Biden, right after he left office, came out just a couple of months ago that he's battling cancer. There's been questions about both of them with their mental awareness and where they're at, and that definitely is a concern. Donald Trump in his first term, towards the end, he had COVID and was very sick for a while. And obviously that was definitely kind of a very concerning health issue for him. So this is pretty common lately. Now, what's interesting is before these two guys, the three previous presidents we had were quite a bit younger. Yes. We had Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and they were all in their, I think Obama was in his late 40s, and the others were in their 50s when they took office. So I think all three of them are still younger than both Biden and Trump at this point, which is kind of amazing to think about. It came up in the 2016 election. There was some talk about Hillary Clinton's health. There was a couple of times where she looked, because she's not a young woman either. Right. There was a couple of times where it looked like she was kind of struggling getting in and out of cars, and people were talking about that. So this has been an ongoing thing over the last few years. But in the history of the presidency, there's been other cases like this, and we're going to dive into.
Did not tell the truth about the health of the president. They did not tell
the truth, or I wouldn't say they lied, but maybe they forgot to mention things.
Okay.
Now, 8 people who have been president have died while they're in office. Now, 4 of them, 8 people, 4 of them were assassinations. So obviously that's a little different. Oh, okay, right. So you had Lincoln, and you had Kennedy, and you had McKinley, and you had Garfield were assassinated in office. Right. 4 other presidents died of natural causes.
Oh, I never knew that, really.
Yeah,
I never heard of a president dying of natural causes.
Yeah, so the first one was William Henry Harrison. And if you know the name, it's because you watched The Simpsons, because there's actually a song, William Henry Harrison, I Died in 30 Days. He was the shortest term president. He died about a month after he took office.
What did he have doing?
The theory is, nobody really knows, because this was 1840 this happened. So, the records aren't, that great.
That's when people used to just die and nobody knew why. And
he was older. He was in his 60s, I believe, which was very old for the 1840s. Yeah, for the
18, right.
And at the time, he was the oldest person elected president. And he gave his inaugural address at the White House, and it was very cold out, and he gave a really long speech outside. It was about an hour long, the speech. And people think that he caught pneumonia, and that's what killed him.
Oh, boy.
Some people say it could have been an infection. The White House at the time the area around the White House was not very built up. So the water supply was probably pretty tainted. Basically, people went to the bathroom and also got their drinking water out of the same water supply, which is not the way you want to do things. That is not
like a dysentery situation.
Yeah, there's some issues. And that actually leads to the next president who died in office, Zachary Taylor, who died about 10 years later in 1850. And the story goes with him is he ate a lot of cherries on a really hot day and drank some cold milk, and they say that might have been infected with bacteria.
Oh.
And he got a stomach cramp and died a couple of days later.
Wow.
And again, too, that might be related to the drinking water situation in Washington, D.C. So then the next president who died of natural causes, or maybe not, because there's also with Zachary Taylor, there was some theories that he might have been poisoned. But
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
how do you know, right?
that's never been substantiated. And in the 1990s, they actually exhumed his body and tested it for cyanide and couldn't find any traces of it. But the next president to die in office was Warren Harding, and he had a heart attack. And he was president in the 1920s.
Okay, I might have heard of that one.
Yeah, that one. He was known basically for that, and for also having many affairs, apparently. Right. And there are some theories that his wife might have got wind of those affairs, and he might not have had a heart attack. He might have been poisoned by his wife.
Or maybe the affairs caused the heart attack.
Maybe he was under a lot of strain. You don't know. He was the hardest working man. And so the other president to die in office was Franklin Roosevelt. Now, there's a little bit of an asterisk next to this because he was president forever. He was elected 4 times.
Okay.
And he was sick in the White House. He had polio and was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
We're going to get into him a little bit more in a little bit because there's a lot there. But he had a cerebral hemorrhage and passed away. Again, he was kind of an older man at this point and, had been battling this disease. So those were the ones who actually died. But there have been presidents who didn't die, who basically were covering up other health issues while they were president. And so Dwight Eisenhower, who was president in the 50s, he had a heart attack when he was in the White House.
And nobody knew?
They originally said he had a digestive issue. And eventually it did come out that, it was a heart attack. And he actually had multiple heart attacks in his life, some before and some after he was president. But he actually did have a heart attack while he was the president.
I feel like I'm kind of okay with this cover up a little bit because you do want a strong leader, at least you did at the point. You wanted them to be, you didn't want to be leaderless or, on the public, like in the world, audience as far as that
someone
goes,
like Eisenhower too. He was a general in World War II. So,
like you wanted that.
He was a macho guy. Yeah, absolutely.
At the time.
So the next president after Eisenhower was John Kennedy. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, he did die in the office when he was assassinated. But he also was very sick. He had Addison disease.
Oh, I think I remember that.
Yeah,
what was that exactly?
Basically, it's a lot of back problems and not really an invalid, but really tough for him to get around. And there are some theories that he might have died in office even if he wasn't shot. Because he apparently was relatively sick. And of course, he spent a lot of time in bed, if you know what I mean. So that might have hurt his back too. He had a pretty. We'll do another episode on presidents and some of their other scandals.
Sure,
but we're just going to focus on the health stuff at this point. More recently, Ronald Reagan, of course, was shot when he was president, and they really kind of covered up how bad he was after the assassination. They showed there's a very famous picture of him standing up the next day, and like his wife's helping him up, but he's kind of like standing and smiling and waving. And what they don't tell you in that picture, apparently there were 2 nurses like crouched out of the picture, like holding him up.
Oh boy.
And again, like you said earlier, this is kind of also to kind of project an air of, that everything's okay kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like how your parents won't tell you if they're sick.
Exactly.
You try to kind of. At least that's how I envisioned the idea.
No, I think that's a pretty accurate description. And of course, Reagan had Alzheimer's disease, and he probably was showing early signs of that towards the end of his presidency. We don't. Nobody really knows exactly when that starts. There's still a lot of research going on that.
Sure.
But with the timeline of when he died, and the timeline that people are usually affected by it, there's a pretty good chance that he was president and maybe was under the effect of the disease at that point.
And that's the other thing. Like, how much do you have to disclose about a president's health? Like, certain things should be private, right? But then some cognitive things you might want to know, or at least you want to make sure that someone is, doing something about it.
It's definitely a valid question,
right?
When you're talking about people. So I'm going to go back to some older examples. Chester A. Arthur who was president in the 1880s, he suffered from Bright's disease, which just sounds like an old-timey disease.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what that is, but basically it's a kind of a kidney ailment kind of thing.
Okay.
And he was battling that throughout his presidency and died a relatively short time after he left the White House, like 3 years after he left the White House. He ended up passing away. Then there was James K. Polk, who was president in 1849. He left office on March 1849. That was his last day as president. He died in June of 1849. So he passed away 3 months after he left the White House.
How did he pass away?
He, again, this was around the same area we were talking about where the water in the Washington, D.C. was pretty bad, and he probably died of an infection. So he might not have been sick when he was president.
Right.
He could have actually gotten sick afterwards or while he was president towards the end, and he just got sick and died. And again, this was a time where the medical, technology wasn't great. They were still using leeches to bleed people at the time.
Right.
So, not great. Not great at all.
Yeah.
Probably the most interesting one, though, and we got a couple other ones we're going to talk about, but the most interesting one, I think, is Woodrow Wilson. Now, he was president during World War I.
Okay.
After the war ended, he was very involved with the peace negotiations and set up the League of Nations, which was kind of the forerunner of the United Nations. And he wanted, make the world safe for democracy. The World War I was going to be the war to end all wars.
Right.
He had a very idealistic vision of the future for the United States and the world. Obviously, a lot of that didn't work out as he hoped, but he got a lot of resistance in the U.S. from joining the League of Nations. A lot of people in the U.S. after the World War I was over, they're like, we don't want to have anything to do with anybody anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Let's just focus on
our own.
America first, as some people might say. So he went out and was campaigning to the American people, not running for office, but campaigning about his peace plan to try and get support for it. And he had a stroke while he was out campaigning. And again, there's a lot of gray area about this because they were covering up quite a bit of it. And this was definitely a cover-up of pretty epic proportions because he had what was called a mild stroke and was actually back out on the road a short time later. And then he had a massive stroke, which they said, again, was just a mild stroke. But he was pretty much an invalid the last few months of his presidential term, maybe like the last year of his presidential term. And nobody saw him. And again, this is an era before TV.
Sure. Right.
Before, it was just newspapers, really was the only way people got information. And reporters were kind of in on these kind of things. They wouldn't report things if they were asked not to. Not like today where they'll report pretty much anything.
They can't wait, right? They can't
exactly. They're falling over themselves to put things in the paper. But his wife, Edith, who was his second wife, because his first wife actually died when he was in office and he remarried.
Oh, boy.
And so, yeah, that was a first lady who actually had a health issue and died. She was basically running the country. Edith Wilson at that point. She was not necessarily making decisions, but she was deciding who got to talk and communicate with the president. So she was kind of
like the gatekeeper.
Yeah, very much a gatekeeper. Yeah, exactly. So, that had a tremendous influence on policy and what was going on. And
that's fascinating.
Some people do call her the first female president.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't official.
Right.
We mentioned about Roosevelt, of course, who passed away in office, but people didn't know at the time Roosevelt was president that he was in a wheelchair.
That I remember, yeah. That was bad, like PR, yeah.
Supposedly there's only 2 pictures of him in a wheelchair, and they never were released to the public until many years after he died.
Sure, yeah.
And if you watch newsreel footage of him, because he's always sitting.
Right.
A lot of times when he was at events outdoor, they would drive his car right up to the podium, and he would give his speech from a car seat. And people knew he had polio because that was a big deal, but they didn't know that he was, as incapacitated as he was. And they had
was he elected? I'm sorry. Was he elected when he was in a wheelchair? Was he?
Yeah.
He was elected. He was actually in a wheelchair when he was elected president.
Yeah, he was an up and coming politician when he was younger. He's the cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. He was very active in government, and he actually was nominated as vice president in the 1920s. They lost the election, but he was kind of seen as one of the rising stars in the Democratic Party. Then he contracted polio and was out of the public eye for years.
Okay.
And he made a comeback, and that's when he was elected president in the 1930s. But again, they covered it up. They did not talk about it. And his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was very involved with things too, and protecting him and gatekeeping kind of thing. But
he may not have been elected had he disclosed that he was in a wheelchair.
Probably not. If you would have saw on the campaign trail in a wheelchair. And he did this thing too, where he didn't basically have any use of his legs, but he could he would put on these big metal braces and he would walk with a cane. And he would have somebody who would hold an arm of somebody. Usually it was one of his bodyguards or one of his family members. And the other side he would have a cane. And he could kind of they called it the Roosevelt shuffle. And he could and his legs were completely immobile, but he was kind of swinging them back and forth with his hips to kind of make it look like he could walk. Sure. And that's what was put in the newsreels. Basically when he gives his famous address when World War II started, when he talked about after Pearl Harbor, a day which will live in infamy, there's film reels of him walking up to the podium.
Oh, wow. That's how far they went
how far they went, yeah.
Hide that, sure.
And people knew he was in bad shape because when he gave his last address in 1945 to Congress, he actually did sit down. And he did make a comment I don't get around as well as I used to, or something like that. And people knew that he was maybe in bad shape at that point, kind of thing. But yeah, the general public had no idea that he could walk. And again, a much different era in the way the news press handled things, because they did know. But also, obviously, how media was presented. There was, he wasn't on TV. He was, these occasional movie reels that people would see maybe once a week. Yeah. That they would, very carefully monitor what was going into them. And so the other president who had an issue was Grover Cleveland. Now, he was president in the 1890s, I believe it was. He actually had a cancerous tumor in his jaw. Oh. So to cover this up, when they removed it, they had to do surgery to remove it. People just said he was going on vacation.
Oh, really?
He went on a private yacht of a friend of his, and they operated on him at sea, on this boat. And apparently it was very risky because,
for sure,
you wouldn't get surgery on a boat, I would think.
I mean, you need a hospital, right?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
So they removed it, and they actually had to remove part of his jawbone, and they had to make a prosthetic so he kind of would look normal, kind of thing. So again, this was in an era too where things just weren't said and people didn't know a lot of things.
Sure, and then people didn't ask. I'm sure that you don't. Right. They just kind of accepted what was presented to them. But
exactly. There was very this was pre-Watergate, people knowing that there was a president lying about something would have been shocking. Right. At the time. So so we're talking about a lot of physical ailments, but there's also obviously mental health too. And most people feel that Abraham Lincoln suffered from depression.
Oh, right.
He lost a couple of children when they were very young. They died when they were, children. And of course, obviously, he was president during the Civil War.
Yeah, and,
that's pretty depressing. And and his wife definitely had some mental issues. That's pretty well documented. That they had a pretty dysfunctional relationship because she was a handful to deal with, apparently. But that was, and they just said he was very melancholy all the time.
Well, that's before they really put a name to depression as well.
True.
Right?
Absolutely.
So he probably didn't, wasn't necessarily hidden, didn't know, right?
Definitely.
What is this?
And, that is also something, too, because he died tragically.
Right.
And because he's kind of like this martyr.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that has been put retroactively on it.
Right. This kind of somber.
It makes him more of a tragic figure, absolutely.
Well, I also think sometimes the presidents that are, that there were no videos of, or you have this vision of them. It's really just a picture, that's all it is. You can't imagine them smiling or laughing or anything other than it's just very basic picture. Yeah, it's funny.
I mean, the first few of them, it was just paintings. It wasn't even a picture.
Yeah, right, exactly.
George Washington, we just, what he looks like on a dollar bill. That's what we think he looks like.
I know. I would love to see George Washington in person. I just think that would be fascinating. I just picture this still person, just moving.
Right.
It's just
very stoic and kind of frowning a little bit.
Everyone was so upset.
Yep. And they all had the powdered wigs, the white hair with the powdered wigs. And well, the big thing with George Washington, health-wise, of course, was his teeth.
Right.
He had the wooden teeth, which they say probably weren't wooden. They probably actually were animal teeth, which were molded into, and maybe some teeth from slaves too, which is definitely kind
disgusting. Oh my
God, gross. Yeah, so they may have been actual teeth, but he got them from other sources because he didn't have good dental hygiene, apparently. The other president who had definitely some issues was Franklin Pierce. He was the 14th president, and most historians feel he was definitely an alcoholic.
Oh, okay.
And again, he had a pretty tragic life as well, too. That he lost a lot of young children. When he was elected president, he was taking a train to Washington, D.C. with his wife and his youngest son, his only surviving son, because he had two children who died when they were infants. They didn't make it out of infancy because that's what happened back in those days. So this was their only child and, obviously very special to them. He was, I think, like 12 years old or so. They were taking a train to Washington, D.C., and there was a train accident, and the son was decapitated in front of him.
Oh, come on. I did not need to know that. That's one I would have liked to not know. Sorry.
That's pretty rough. I mean, that's about as awful as it can go. And I mean, talk about, going from the highest of highs to lowest of lows. You're just elected president of the United States. And to have this happen to you is just insane.
It's insane. Oh my God.
But apparently he had a drinking problem before this even.
Okay.
And his wife was very much a temperate person who, very pious. So, she got him to stop drinking. But she went into a depression after her child died.
Oh, for sure.
And so she wasn't like keeping an eye on him. And he apparently drank himself. And eventually, many years after he left office, he died of liver disease, which was, essentially because of his alcoholism.
Oh my goodness!
So yeah, that's a nice downer to kind of bring.
Oh my goodness!
So I'm going to say one that's a little more fun and a little more wacky.
Okay, please.
It's kind of lining up. And when you want fun and wacky in the White House, you always go to Bill Clinton because he just love him or hate him, he there's some stories there. Right. There's some stories there. So when he was president, he had a serious knee injury. In 1997, he was visiting the house of golfer Greg Norman, who was a friend of his, and they were spending some time together. He was doing a little break. It was down in Florida, I believe. He was at his home, and they were up late talking. And Bill Clinton went down the stairs to go to his room or wherever he was staying, and he basically got his leg caught and tore a tendon in his knee.
Hey.
Pretty painful stuff. And
was he
Greg
drinking?
Norman. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. So Greg Norman says it was the most amazing thing he ever saw because as soon as he stumbled, all these Secret Service guys who he didn't even know were in his house were all of a sudden around him and carrying him away. And he had it was just people just appeared out of anywhere were catching him as he was falling. So he had to get surgery and he was on crutches. And if you look at that time period, he was on crutches. Now, when the White House released the press release, you asked if he was drinking. Mm-hmm. The press release said, President Clinton yesterday suffered a knee injury, while tripping down a flight of stairs. He tore his tendon, he had to undergo surgery, expected to make a full recovery, blah, blah, blah. The last line of the press release was alcohol was not involved, which immediately made everybody think that alcohol was involved. Right, exactly.
It's not like he was driving, so why would that even come into play?
He could have a drink and trip,
right?
but just the fact, and Bill Clinton, again, as we talked about, presidents occasionally bending the truth. Bill would do that. Mm-hmm. He would do that with the best of them. So, a lot of people were suspicious about it. And the other thing that people were suspicious about, and again, this is like a wag the tail kind of thing, but people thought he was trying to do this as a distraction because things were starting to break about the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
So maybe for sympathy, he's on crutches.
Exactly. There was, when George W. Bush left the White House, Dick Cheney, who was his vice president, had an issue. He had an issue where he shot one of his friends, but that's another story for another day. But he was sick, and at the inauguration for the Obamas and Joe Biden, who were coming in as president and vice president, he was in a wheelchair.
Oh, okay.
And like people were like, people were just like, he's just trying to get sympathy because everybody hates him. And everybody said he kind of looked like a Bond villain because he was bald and in a wheelchair. They said he had a little cat on his lap and he was stroking it. He would have looked just like a James Bond villain.
Oh boy!
So yeah, that was the issue. But that's some of the stories about presidential health.
Interesting.
So I mean, would you prefer not to? I know definitely the one about the kid dying on the train. I'm sure you don't want to.
I actually don't want to, and I like to know things, but there's certain things like I don't want to know necessarily. I like a cognitive decline. I do because I feel like that's something where you need to step in. But just a physical decline, I feel like keep that to yourself. It's personal. To me, it's personal. Right. Like I don't need to know it. And do you remember the movie Dave? I think it was Dave.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right when you replaced the president. I mean, that's what I was thinking. I was like, imagine that happened. I mean, that would just be wild.
One of my favorite things in recent memory is when President Trump had one of his physicals. They released his weight and height, and it was exactly the same as Tom Brady's. And if you see a picture of Tom Brady and Donald Trump standing next to each other, they do not have the same physique. Let's just put it that way. I'm thinking Donald might have a few pounds on him.
Right.
Thank you for listening to The Last Radio Show. If you like the show, please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on your favorite platform. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at The Last Radio Show. We will talk to you soon.
The Last Radio Show. The Last Radio Show.